one thing I wish I could be better at as a mom would be to think before I speak, because words really do matter to them.
I wish I could spend more quality time with my kids.
I wish I could take away the pain. I don't know. I wish I could take away the pain that I caused them when I divorced their dad.
I wish that I was a better listener.
I wish I could be better at managing my time.
I wish I could be more patient with my kids.
My mom is really pretty. You're my hero, Mom. My mom is super sweet. My mom is so cool. My mom is so awesome and hot. My mom really loves me. I love about my mom that she takes good care of the babies because she's a foster mom. At Disneyland, what I love to do with my mom is go down Splash Mountain, and we do a special pose, and it looks like this. My mom is really smart because she listens to the Bible.
My mom takes really good care of me. She makes me feel really important. You're the best, Mom.
She is my best friend. She really is. I love all her phone calls. She always apologizes for calling me. So sorry, I know you're busy, and thank you for answering, but I love when she calls me. It's like one of the best parts of my day. I think she's pretty great.
She always makes me feel like she's my number one fan, and no matter what I'm doing in my life or what I've done, she's always praising me for doing a good job and makes me feel important, and you know, I appreciate that from her.
Happy Mother's Day, Mom. We love you so much. Happy Mother's Day, Mom. Happy Mother's Day, Mom. Happy Mother's Day, Mom. I love you.
I hope this makes you cry.
Happy Mother's Day, Mom. I love you so much.
Well, it is Mother's Day, and we want to say thanks to all of our moms, especially those of you in that stage when you're trying to figure out if you're making any difference at all. Is anybody listening to you? It is so tough. It is so challenging out there. We just want to encourage you that you probably are doing a better job than what you recognize. So keep it up. We also want to thank all of our women who help us in so many different ways, and so that's why when you leave out of the room today, we have a rose for you if you are a female, whether you happen to have been blessed to be a mother or whether God has different plans for you. And we know that that can be a tough thing as well, to be in church on a Mother's Day if you don't happen to be a mom. And so we want you to know that you're valuable as well, just as valuable, and we want to honor all of our ladies. And so if you will take a rose on your way out, we would love that. We've had always requests of people wanting to get a rose from for their mom who's not here today, and so if we could wait until the end of the third service to make sure we get all those, because I didn't want to order too many roses, and so I don't want to be in a lot of trouble. So if you'll just take one at this point, that would be great. But if you're a mom or a female, you know that there is this desire to care for, to provide help with, and that feeling really is a gift of God from God. That desire to protect, that desire to do what's best, that desire to be that one who protects, that really is a gift from God. In fact, Jesus, when he was here on the earth, looked out over a group of people and he said about himself, how often would I have gathered you, very interesting thing about Jesus talking about himself in this way, how often would I have gathered your children, talking about Israel, this nation, your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you would not. You never really thought that Jesus called himself a chicken, did you? But that's what he's talking about in this passage, to say that feeling of wanting to gather your children around you and to protect them, to encourage them, that really does come from God. And you really are acting as Jesus would want you to act when you do that with your children, whether they are tiny and cute or whether they get to be ugly and grown up. Either way, you still have that desire, and that is a gift of God. So thank you for doing that for us. Thank you for being that kind of mom for us. In fact, that desire to protect and to provide for is what the Apostle Paul is talking about when we come to our passage today in the book of Romans. If you've got your Bibles, we're going to be in verses 16 and 17 of Romans chapter 1. We've been here for a while because this passage, I think, is going to be so important to us. Why? Well, because Paul is talking to a ragtag group of believers in this metropolitan city called Rome, where Christianity is not encouraged, where everything is against those who would follow Christ. In fact, there are the first generation to believe in a dead guy who was raised from the dead, and they begin to live that out in opposition to the rules of their day, where they would refuse to just add Jesus along with all the other gods of their age, the gods of the empire at that time, the gods of the culture. And because of that, they face intense persecution, intensity of this anti-Christian view, and that's exactly what you and I, as North Americans, are beginning to face and beginning to experience, and it's probably going to become more difficult and more challenging with greater and greater intensity, which is why we're going to have to know why we believe what we believe, what it is that we believe, and whether or not that's willing to take a stand into a culture that is not just post-Christian, but a culture that is anti-Christian. And it's going to get worse and worse with greater intensity. And so what we've got to do is to listen to what the Scriptures teach us, what Paul is instructing a people who are facing that, and then figure out how we're going to live and to respond. So in Romans chapter 1, we pick up in verse 16 today, where Paul says, "For I am not ashamed of the gospel." Now, to know why he's saying for or because, you kind of have to go to the previous passage, and if you've got that, you can read that. But today we're focused on, I am not ashamed of the gospel, for or because it is the power of God for salvation to everyone who believes, to the Jew first and also to the Greek, for in it the righteousness of God is revealed from faith, for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. Why is this important to us? Why is it that Paul says, for I am not ashamed of the gospel? I think it's one reason in particular, and that is that this world desires to shame you and your commitment to God. That's what this world is designed to do. This is what the first believers faced. They faced this feeling of shame, and that's what you and I are beginning to face. And we're going to face that with greater intensity, more and more often, in more and more environments. And you and I are going to have to figure out, how are we going to respond when people want to shame us for what the Bible teaches, to shame us for what we believe that we are called to be and to do? How are we going to respond when we are being shamed? Well, you may need to know what the word shame is. And this is a card that Mom does have in her arsenal, and Mom does play every once in a while. And some of you may have grown up in homes where this was the only card Mom had to play, and that was shame. Well, she might have used the card of shame in your life, but she was doing it for good purposes. At least we're going to assume that about her. But the culture that we're going to find ourselves in is going to play the shame card, not for your benefit, not for good, but for a challenge and for difficulty. What does shame mean? Well, one definition from Brene Brown is that shame is the intense, painful feeling of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of acceptance and belonging. Now, you know mom has done that before, right? Moms, you're probably even feeling a little bit of shame right now for using the shame card, but sometimes we do that to get right behavior. We want them to feel a certain way, feel like they're not worthy, so therefore they will become worthy and they will begin to do what they're supposed to do. Well, what this world is going to do for us is they're going to try to shame us into changing what the Bible teaches. They're going to say, oh, if you believe that, then you are discriminating against people. Hey, if you believe that, then you're being narrow-minded. Hey, if you believe that, you're being arrogant, that you shouldn't enforce any of those kind of things. And so what the world's going to do is they're going to put pressure on us to abandon the teachings of the Scripture, particularly when we won't just join in with everybody else, but when we actually stand up for what the Bible teaches, because we really have no other option as followers of Christ. We're going to have to figure out how to deal with that shame, how to deal in a healthy manner with that shame. We can look as an example of who was shamed, and that was Jesus, and we can look at how he was shamed. In Hebrews chapter 12, we think it was Paul, maybe it wasn't, but it was at least a writer who said these words and talking about Jesus. He said, therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and sin which clings so closely, and let us run with endurance the race that is set before us. That's what he's talking to these believers. And then he says the motivation or the encouragement of that is to look to Jesus, who is the founder and perfecter of our faith, who, for the joy that was set before him, endured the cross, despising the shame. The word for despising there can mean to hold negligible, to hold unworthy, to look at the shame, to feel the shame, to disregard the shame, because the shame, in comparison to the joy that was set before Christ, didn't really matter. It didn't tip the scales in any kind of sense. It was not something that because of the shaming that he would stop or to change. He says he's going to despise the shame, and now look at the result of that. As a result of that, in despising the shame, looking for the joy, enduring the cross, he is now seated at the right hand of the throne of God. So you and I are going to have to recognize that when we go into certain environments, and based upon what the Bible teaches, we have to disagree. We have to say something different. We have to respond in a different way than what the world wants to do. And when they begin to shame us for that, one of the first things that we have to do is that we have to look to the joy, not of the temporary circumstances, though they will and may come, but we have to look beyond that and decide that there is something greater, something more valuable, something that we want more, that is better for us, that is longer lasting than the difficulty that we're going to face. And so we count the cost, we despise or consider the shame negligible, and then we look to the joy. But what are we supposed to do as a church? Well, in order to do that, we're going to have to train ourselves, how to be true disciples of what Christ would ask us to be. See, the days have come and gone where it was socially acceptable, where it was socially beneficial for you to be a Christian. Now, we don't face this quite in Branson, Missouri. We're going to be the last bastion of Christian culture, and after the world is long gone on, we're still going to be playing our country music and our God and country stuff, and we're still going to be okay. But many of you are going to live in other environments, whether through graduation or whether they're just moving, where there is not going to be a positive view of a person who is following Jesus. And what's going to happen is that the societal pressure that encouraged your being nice, being a Christian, is going to dissipate, and the encouragement and the pressure is going to be not to be a Christian, or if you're going to be a Christian, to be a Christian who holds nothing of value that the Bible teaches, or to hold very little what the Bible teaches. So what we've got to do in the process of that is to figure out, how do we make disciples? There's a passage of Scripture that have really become under its spell, if you will, over the last 4 or 5 months. And it's this verse in Matthew 10, verse 16, which says, "Behold," Jesus talking to his disciples, "I am sending you out as sheep in the midst of wolves, so be wise as serpents and innocent or harmless as doves." Now, if you went to the prayer breakfast this week, you heard a guy talk about this passage, and you're going to think that I stole his message. No, that's not true. He stole my message, except it was much better than what I can bring. But either way, we have been concentrating on this because most of my life in my calling and ministry has been teaching sheep how to live with other sheep. That's what my ministry's been about. Because you see, some sheep want to listen to certain kinds of music when they come to their gathering of sheep. And there are other sheep who don't like that kind of music of sheep, and they begin to argue with those sheep and say, well, you're not really a sheep because you're not listening to the sheep music. And there's another group of sheep going, no, we are sheep just like you. And my role and responsibility, and what my ministry's been built on, is helping sheep get along with one another. Now, that doesn't sound like fun, and it's not fun, but that's what I've been able to do. That's the calling, to gather all the sheep up and go, now listen, sheep over here, this sheep really is a sheep just like you are, and they don't sing like you sing, or they do this, or they have a different option, all that kind of stuff, but we're all sheep. Can't all God's sheep just get along, okay? I know this sheep likes that color, but this sheep over here likes that color, and this sheep likes it this temperature, and that sheep likes it that temperature. And so I've spent all my life and all my ministry trying to get sheep to get along. And you know what? We've done really well at this church. We've done really, really well. That's awesome. But while we've been trying to figure out how sheep are supposed to work with sheep, guess what the wolves have been doing? They have been reproducing with vast numbers, and they can't wait to get to the sheep. And we have no idea how to deal with the wolves. And when we start talking to the wolves about music, they're just going to slaughter all of the sheep. They're going to say, it doesn't matter what kind of music you listen to. We've got some great music that you would like to listen to that none of you sheep are going to like. And we've spent all of our time working on how to raise sheep among sheep, that the wolves have multiplied. And the gate's about to be open. And we're going to be swept away as sheep. Unless we start spending our energy and our time worrying less about sheep getting along with other sheep, and instead start training sheep how to live in the midst of wolves. Which means we're going to have to be wise. Wise as serpents. Wise as snakes. In fact, some translations use the word shrewd, which I prefer, but we as a staff have been talking about that word, and we think that shrewd has some bad connotations, and so we're not going to call you shrewd, we're going to call you wise. But if you think about it, how does the snake survive? Does the snake come knock on your door and say, hey, I'm here? Does the snake go overtly into do things so that he can be seen? No, not around my house, because the snake will not live that long if he shows his face, right? So you and I are going to have to figure out how we can be sheep in a culture of wolves, and one of the strategies may not be for the sheep to yell at the wolves. It may not be one of the strategies. It may not be for the sheep to line up and protest a lot of things the wolves are doing. It may not be the right way to do that. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But we've got to go in there wise as serpents and innocent or harmless as doves. And I tell you what, we may not know how to do that very well. And you and I, above 45 or so, we don't know how to do that because we've never had to live like that. But listen, the people that are following us, anybody under 45, anybody under the opportunity to have all their money set aside, so they've got their 401k and it's all great, anybody underneath that is going to have to live in a culture that's radically different than ours. And we're going to have to help them. In fact, for us, what we're going to do is that we're going to raise the level of discipleship here at FBC Branson by starting a biblical process of trying to apply biblical teachings into our modern and contemporary culture, and we're going to call that Lead You, is what we're going to call that. And this is going to be a new terminology, a new strategy, a new brand, a new logo for us for in-depth study of the Scriptures that's not primarily focused on just us knowing what the Scriptures teach in some kind of random fashion, but a systematic worldview understanding so that when we go out in this world, we will not only know what we believe, but we will know why we believe it and why we believe this biblical principle, whatever it is, applies in this particular context. And typically, churches have not done very well with that. And so we want to begin to do that. That's not the only thing that we're going to be doing. We're going to be relooking at our small group strategy and our small group structure coming in the fall. But we're going to really begin with a biblical basis where we want to develop a track of study where we're going to focus on what we're calling Lead You that are doing some of the basics. In fact, in the future, we want to raise the bar to this, that anybody who wants to lead within our congregation, after we ask the question of, do you have a background check? Because that's kind of important today if you're going to work with our children and preschoolers. But after that, the question will be, have you gone through Lead You, or Lead You 1, or Lead You Basic? We're still trying to figure out the terms, because we want this to be the new standard and the new basis that everything else is focused on. In order to start that, not to complete it, but to start it, we're going to offer that class beginning June the 1st, which is a Wednesday night this summer. Now, I know, stop. I know what you're thinking already. Well, I'm not going to be here this summer. I understand. In fact, I'm not even here at this first one myself, but I'm not the only one teaching this. And so what we're doing this summer for 12 weeks, 10 of the 12 weeks of this summer on Wednesday nights, we're going to introduce this new topic that at first is going to start out kind of simple in this first semester, but then it's going to grow more difficult. If you're not here, we're going to capture it, not with videotape, because you don't do that with video, but we're going to capture all the ones and zeros that are there. We're going to put it online so that you, in case you were to miss one of those, can keep up. We'll reproduce this again, probably in the fall, maybe in the spring, so that there's constantly a group of Lead You, which is the entry point, the base level that we all want to start with so that we're all on the same terminology. We will add more difficult classes. We'll add really challenging things. This is not just come and listen. This will be some assignments that we're going to ask you to do. There's going to be interaction in class, and it's going to be a little bit different. And so we want this to be the new standard in the future for us so that all of us will be a part of Lead You or Leadership University. So that's one of the things that we're doing. But the second thing that we're going to be doing this fall, along with some other things, not just this, but we're going to begin to think more about how we can impact this next generation in a greater depth than we've ever done that. With children's ministry, we're going to be adding a Sunday morning worship experience in the fall. But it's not just a worship gathering. It's not just that one thing we're going to be doing, but we're going to be diving deep because the world that you are raising children in is not even the world that my parents raised me in. The changes are coming so quickly, so radically different. In fact, this week I was watching. How many of you remember the Atari 2600? Any of you remember the Atari 2600? It was like state of the art. If you didn't get that for Christmas, then your family did not love you. I mean, it was that clear cut, right? And so I was watching a video this past week of children today, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds, trying to figure out how to play the Atari 2600. If you've not seen this, you ought to Google that or whatever you do. And these kids could not figure it out. They took the cartridges and they were trying to open the cartridge to find the actual thing that you put in the machine. They didn't know that was the cartridge. They couldn't turn it on. They couldn't make it connect. And I'm thinking, how can we raise our children not to know the basics of an Atari 2600? Where is our culture today? But our kids are facing things that you and I have no idea how to process. It's not like it used to be. It's not going to be like it used to be. It's going to be different, and we're going to have to train them to stand in that culture and that context. And that means preschool, that means children, that means youth. We've got to concentrate more in that, and it's going to be different. In fact, the things of this world in the last several months have been so strange to me and so foreign that I think it has finally pushed me across the line. I think it's finally pushed me. I just want to be left alone. I just want to preach my little sermons and go back to the house and pat you on the head and sheep. That'd be nice to this sheep over here. I really would rather do that. I really, really would. But this world is making some strange decisions that we just can't sit back and let them do that without us preparing our children on how to be wise in that. You know, we just can't. We have a learning center, for instance, that we have a waiting list on the learning center that I think we have like third graders who are holding hands going, we need to get our children signed up for the learning center because there's such a waiting list for that. And so, okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit. These are like teenagers who are thinking this, not third graders. But we're out of room. We've been out of room for a long time in our learning center. And we have people that are saying, would you take my kids for 10 years and teach them whatever you want to, and we will give you money? And we go, no. That doesn't make any sense anymore. So we may have to do some things to expand that. We have some things that are just strange in school today. for our younger ones where they've got to make some decisions about some strange things, and the adults are some of the adults have their hands tied because of whatever's going on. So we may have to figure out some of those things. I don't have solutions right now. I just know that we've got to be training these sheep that we have among us to live among wolves. And I don't know if I know how to do that or not, but together, surely we can figure that out. Because the world that we're sending our kids in is not the world that we grew up in. And you know what? That's really, really good news, though. Because, see, people in our culture that you and I grew up in, those of you in their 40s or older, we could pretend like we were a Christian and everything was okay. Hey, listen, in the future, pretending that you're a Christian is not going to be okay. You either are going to be one or you're going to disavow all of those things. And for the gospel to continue, we had better be training up our next generation to know God, to believe in God, and to stand and to not be ashamed when the world tries to shame. Now, why? Well, not because we're trying to be difficult, not because we want to be strange, but simply because Paul says, I am not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power to save. It is the power to save. For I'm not ashamed of the gospel, for it is the power of God for salvation to everyone. The power to save from what? Well, if you grew up in church, you would say, well, it is the power to save you from hell. That's what we would say. And that's not a bad answer. I mean, that's kind of a good answer. But that's not really the reason. That's not really the power to save. That's not from what they're being saved. It's not that we're being saved from hell. We're being saved, according to verse 18, from the wrath of God. See, here's the deal. Our problem is not that we're sinners. The problem is that we have a holy God. Because, see, I can forgive your sin and you can forgive my sin because I'm a sinner and I don't want to be too tough on you, because if I'm too tough on you, then you get a chance to be too tough on me. And I know there's something you can find wrong in my life. That's why nobody wants to be a politician today, because they'll go interview your kindergarten teacher and they'll put that on the news about what you did in kindergarten. And so nobody wants to do any of that anymore because all of us have sin, all of us have problems, all of us are messed up. That's not the problem. The problem is that we have a holy God who is coming back to get rid of all sin, to get rid of all unrighteousness. He's going to come back and he's going to be at war with sin and unrighteousness. Why? Because he is holy. And his holiness demands justice. And see, many of you go, that doesn't sound like a very nice God. Well, that's just my point. You don't understand because we've not taught you through Lead You how without a holy God, nothing else makes sense. And that's what we want to teach you, so that you can defend against that. You can at least give a reasonable answer, because God is so holy that he must pour out his wrath upon sin, of all sin. And our only choice, our only option is to receive the power that he has for salvation to everyone who believes. You must believe in order to receive that power. Without belief, it will do no good to you. It will be no benefit to you, because he's provided to you something that you chose not to receive. Therefore, you are accountable, and he no longer is accountable because you had the opportunity to believe both of the Jews first, for in it the righteousness, verse 17, for in it the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed. For in it the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed. What does that mean? Well, it's revealed from faith for faith, as it is written, the righteous shall live by faith. You should recognize that verse. That was a series before we got into this in the book of Habakkuk, where basically Habakkuk complains that nobody's doing anything about all the bad people. Which God says, good, I'm going to send some really bad people to get rid of the semi-bad people. To which Habakkuk said, well, that's not fair. And God says, I'm wiping away all sin, Habakkuk, don't you understand? And the only way in is through righteousness. But here's what happens. God sees our sinfulness. He sees our unrighteousness. So what he does for us, instead of just laughing it off, and instead of just lowering the standard, instead of just letting you in, what he decides to do is to take your punishment for you by sending his own son, who was perfect, to be perfect, so that he might pour his wrath on sin upon his son, that the son gathers our sin when we ask him to, and he endured the cross, endured the wrath of God, so that he might impute to us a righteousness that is not ours, so that you and I have the opportunity to live by faith in this world. Faith in his righteousness, not ours. We don't go advancing a Christian way into this world. We don't go to the world and say, well, if everybody just be a Baptist, we all straighten it out. No, that's not going to straighten anything out. Neither is it just being religious. That's not going to solve anything. But if we all have faith in his righteousness, in his gospel, in his work to save us, then how can we be ashamed of that? For we have no other place to turn. It's not that I'm right and you're wrong. It's not that I have this all together. It's not that I'm not without sin. It's simply that God grants us his righteousness so that when he comes to destroy unrighteousness, he will do so, and only those who have received his gospel will be spared of that. And that's why I can't give that up. I can't take that off the list of sin. I can't just be like everybody else. I can't, because once I do that, the only hope of salvation, not only earthly, but heavenly for all of eternity, is gone. Therefore, I have no other option. But I can be wise in how I communicate that and how I live that out. We can train our children how not to be arrogant, not to be rude, not to be mean, but they might stand and live according to righteousness through their faith, that God might use them, use us, so the world might know that there is a Savior and a solution for sin. That's our calling. That's our mission, to train sheep to live among wolves. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes this morning? These are great days. These are awesome days. How sad to live our lives focused on sheep living among sheep. How pitiful that would have been. How sad that would have been if we just spent all of our time making sure that all the Christians play nice with other Christians. What a waste of what God has done for us. God died so that we might find salvation from himself. God died that we might be dependent upon him, that we might live by faith, that we would be dependent upon his righteousness, not our righteousness. And God has been so kind and so faithful and so nice to us that he's going to allow the circumstances of this world to force us into that, so that our only option, our only hope is to live by faith. And so today, if your faith is weak or you have no faith, this is the time to find that faith. Not faith in yourself, not faith in the military of the American power, not in the American dollar or any of those kind of things, because our faith is not there, because God never promised that those things would save us. He never promised that things are going to go well for us. He never promised you're going to have a Lexus in the garage and you're going to drive a boat and you're going to be healthy and wealthy wise. Never been a promise, never been a promise, never will be a promise. God promises that he will be with those who demonstrate faith in his righteousness. From faith, for faith. And these are the days that you and I get to live that out, and this is so exciting. We should not be worried for our children. We shouldn't be panicked. God has us and has his people, his children, and he's inviting us to stand up and not be ashamed. But we better be wise, and we better be innocent and harmless as we do those things. But we have greater opportunity today than we've ever had to live out faith. So these are good days. And we want to be a church ready for that. And in order to be ready for that, we've got to be near to God. We've got to be close to him. We've got to be his disciples so that we listen to what he says and we become like him, following his teachings and being that. Because that's what really makes the difference. It's being with him. Every time somebody was with God, it was known by everyone. And that's what we want people to know about us. First, that we've been with him. And that we've experienced his righteousness. And today, if you are living in unrighteousness, then this is your day to turn to him. And for those of us who face a brave new world out there that's not like the one we came from, these are the days to draw near to him. Be close to our God, who made it possible through his son to do that. So let me pray for you and give you encouragement as we walk out here today as we worship him. Father, these are great days. Oh, these are awesome days. These are days that we get to demonstrate faith. And this world's not going to accept some kind of mamby-pamby, halfway faith, halfway belief, not understanding, but just cultural. It's not going to accept that anymore. And that's good news. So, Father, draw us close to you. Help us to become your disciple. Help us to live by faith. For the one who struggles with their faith, Father, today, would you grant them that faith? And for some of us who are worried about how things are going, how our own health is going, our own finances, Father, would you hold us close? Would you cause us to trust in you, who are greater than we are? So help us, Father, to be your church, be your people who are close to you. And we ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen. I'm going to ask you to stand to your feet. We're going to worship him. During this time of worship, if you've got a decision to make or you want to pray with somebody, we'll be down front. But you worship this God who will draw you close and provide for you everything that you need in this world. Let's sing and worship Him.